All right, Dan Cooper's the plane de-icer.
Yes, sir. I do it the old-fashioned way.
So here we are, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Just getting all the ice off the wings and getting ready for our flight back to New Jersey. This was the first time I've ever had ice on the wings, and I saw planes just taking off with it. I should have taken some pictures of what it looked like before, but especially on that leading edge, it was pretty thick. So we got everything off, and I was probably went overboard with it. In fact, we had to keep turning the plane into the sun to help melt the ice. When we would turn it one way, we couldn't get it off the wing, but we turn one way, get it into the sun, and melt the ice, and then we just wipe it off. So, just better safe than sorry. Alright, here we are taking off out of Gatlinburg. I do love this 3D GoPro camera, but unfortunately I cannot hook up a mic to it, so I have to voice over for the videos. I flew down to Gatlinburg by myself. It was a pretty miserable flight. I did bring the cameras with me, but getting bounced and beat around for 6 hours, it was pretty miserable. So I ended up not recording anything. I had to focus on flying the whole time. I knew the flight back was going to be pretty smooth, and Dan Cooper here is going to ride back with me. I did tell him we had to leave suitcases, that we're going to go on the bus. The rest of our group rode in a bus, but we needed things as light as possible for the mountains that we had to get over, the Smoky Mountains. I had about 40 miles I had to climb to get over them, so I didn't have to have a real aggressive climb, but between the two of us and full of fuel in this plane, I'm not going to shoot up as if I were by myself. So we took off. I was going to contact Knoxville Approach. I waited till I was about 5,000 feet up. The field elevation at Gatlinburg is 1,000 feet. So I waited till I was up a little higher so I can contact Knoxville Approach. Often what I'll do is I'll put the approach on, and when I start hearing radio transmissions from Knoxville Approach, then I'll contact. Sometimes if you try too early, you can't get a hold of anybody. But it's a beautiful view coming out of Gatlinburg. This is looking west. Most of the mountains are to the east. So I flew northeast. Of course, my goal isn't just to fly over the steepest mountains or the tallest mountains I can. I kind of plan the route where one, I've got good airports kind of along the way through the mountains to land at if I were to have a problem. This was a great little route. I could probably post on the map going from Gatlinburg to Jersey. But it took us about 20 minutes to get up to 9,500 feet. That was my cruising altitude. I knew that I was going to have really good winds for this trip back. I had a plan if I did need to refuel, a stop, but I ended up not needing to stop. I was able to fly straight through. Here as I'm climbing, every once in a while I gotta get the pressure build up, so equalize it, pinch your nose, and but it was a really smooth flight. No issues along the way at all. It really went great. Dan was good on the trip. I did explain, and if you have passengers up, I use, of course, flight following, and just explain to him when there's the chatter on the radio, and at times, if he hears my N number, 121 Hotel, this to not talk, or if we're in the middle of a conversation and I immediately start talking on the radio, that he just stops talking. So it all went well. But there's definitely, for passengers, getting used to that chatter, hearing the controllers talking. I know my wife doesn't like it. It makes her nervous just hearing all the noise. The more I fly and use it, I learn to kind of zone it out, and I just listen for my N number. So really, I found these mountains to not be as scary as up in like New Hampshire and Vermont and upstate New York. It seemed like this route I took that really, even though some of them were pretty tall, there were always like farmland area or airports or spots that I could land. It wasn't as scary as some of the other places I've flown where I look down and there's no place to land. I don't see anything. This route really, there's plenty of places to land. So one thing I could probably talk about is my trip down. Now I can talk about this now that I'm in smooth air and things are going smoothly. So I typically flying westerly is tougher. I knew I would deal with headwinds typically from my experience. But this trip down, I had gone through several different flight plans to get over here. I was supposed to be in Gatlinburg on Friday. I looked at the weather Friday, and there was no way I could make it in. It would be IFR. I looked Thursday. They were going to have really high winds, and the headwinds, I would have had 50 knot headwinds, and as much as I love flying, I'm not dealing with 50 knot headwinds. So I looked at Wednesday, and Wednesday looked better. I was planning my flight plan then. I got a briefing before the flight, and when I talked to the briefer, he suggested I not do the route I wanted to. He suggested I go a different route, which brought me to West Virginia, over to the west side of the mountains, and then for 2 hours followed that down. So that 2 hours was pretty miserable, although it got me. I had to get below the clouds. I was at 6,000 feet, but it was pretty miserable going down that 2 hours from West Virginia to Gatlinburg. So it bumpy, and there was just no way I could make a video. The whole time I'm just trying to keep the plane at my altitude. In fact, if I looked on FlightAware, and my flight was just constantly bouncing up and down. So my altitude was just constantly going up and down. There's Dan and I. So I made sure I put in some of the videos. A lot of people ask me like what RPMs I'm at and what speeds I'm getting with what tailwinds. So I tried to put and have a couple little clips here with different speeds and what my RPM settings are. What altitude I'm at. So here's some of that. So here, pilot and passenger. So there's my ground speed, 136. May need to pause this to focus really in if you are interested. So we're both 200 pounds. I'm a little over 200 pounds. And we were up where we were at. There was no density altitude at all. So here we go. So yeah, 51, 50, and really no density altitude at all. I think it was +1 Celsius up at 9,500 feet above sea level. So, and we one thing that made the trip go by quick is we kept seeing how far. We had 149 knot ground speed, so we kept looking to see how fast of a ground speed we were getting. So it's nice when it's behind you and you got that ground speed, but on that trip down, I at some points was in the 50s, 59 knot ground speed, and that's very depressing looking at that. And because I was in rough turbulence and rough weather, I had it throttled back a little bit and I had the plane going slower. There I'm at 150 knot ground speed and I guess 5,200 RPMs. So this flight, I did a cruising altitude of 9,500 pretty much the whole way. When we took off, it was just below freezing in Gatlinburg. It was going to warm up, but it would be where we were flying at was going to be at freezing pretty much for most of the flight. When we got back to, I would say, right around DC, it started getting a little cooler. So a couple things I do. So we have heat. So on the RV12 are most things with I think most planes that are using the 912 ULS, your heat is coming from the radiator. So I like to try to keep that temperature up to around 180 degrees. So I typically use a piece of metal tape. It doesn't really stick real on it. I do heating and air conditioning, so it's the metal tape I use with heat and air conditioning, and I had 2 pieces of that on. And Vans sells a cold cover for the oil cooler, a cover for the oil cooler, and I'm using the medium one. If it's a little colder, I'll even put a little piece of tape on that. I like my oil temperature to be up over 200. It's good to have your oil temp up a little also. So those are kind of the numbers I'm looking at. I'm sure everybody you talk to can have a different opinion on what they prefer. I just find when I need heat, I need that cylinder head temp to be up around 180 degrees. So obviously on climb out, I'm up over 200, the heat's great, but I want to, when I'm in level flight, if I don't have that on there, that cylinder head temp's going to get down to 150, 130 sometimes, and there's no heat. Even though it's 150 degrees, there's no heat. So that's just what I find that works for me. But you do need to be careful on the climb out with your oil and cylinder head temps. There are times on the surface or in climb, I've got to be real careful with my temperatures. So if it's a little warmer on the surface, but you're cruising at 9,000 feet, it's going to be cooler up there. You need to take your time getting up there and but then you'll have some heat up there. So that's kind of what I do for that. And of course, in summertime, I don't worry about anything. I have that all completely off. This is only in wintertime flying. So it was comfortable for us, plenty comfortable. We are probably getting back close into Jersey now. Oh, actually we are into New Jersey. I can tell I see a sand wash. And then, so the airport's basically, you'll see a blue sand wash to the right of the screen, and then right kind of off the nose and to the left, you'll see white, and that's a greenhouse. And the airport's basically right in between that. So typically grass fields can be hard to find, but I tell people those are the things to look for coming in the Bucks. If you're coming from the south, you look for that sand wash. You're coming from the north, you look for the white tops from the nursery. So, and I actually own Bucks Airport now. So Bucks Airport is 00 November. It's a small public use airport, and I went to settlement on it in August and have been working to fix it up. The airport's been around since around the 30s. It's one of the oldest airports in New Jersey. It's named after a gentleman, they called him Buck, and he actually never owned the runway. He flew out of a smaller strip right next to the runway, and he needed the runway longer. And but they've named the airport after him. He was involved with the airport. He sold the fuel. There used to be commuter flights from here to Atlantic City, and there's a lot of history with aviation in Cumberland County. Amelia Earhart's landed here. She had a friend that lived in Bridgeton and would go to Cohanzic Country. Well, we know she flew in here and went to Cohanzic Country Club. And it was mainly a crop duster field for many years, but remained a public use airport. And I'm fixing it up. I'm building some new hangars, fixing up the buildings, fixing the electrical infrastructure. It's not a cheap process, but I'm really interested in just saving this airport and keeping aviation going. As many of these airports are closing, we need to keep these little ones open. So I like flying out of grass. I find it very forgiving, and I take very good care of the grass. I just purchased a new roller, a big 25,000 pound roller to roll the runway, and got all the runway and the fields treated for the healthier grass. And I cut it every week, so just try to really take care of it. Dan's holding the camera here, so it may get a little bumpy. It was smooth up at 9,500, but as we're coming in the land, things did get a little bumpy. I was pretty low on fuel. I was at the minimums, my VFR minimums to land with, and I just wanted to make sure that I haven't had to do a go around in a long time at Bucks. I'm pretty good landing here, but I just wanted to make sure that I did not have to do any go arounds at all and try to take back off with how little fuel I had left. But I didn't have to stop. So I'm coming in a little faster and a little lower. I kind of kept my speed up and then slowed it down at the end. This little plane will just, you come in with any extra speed, you're not going to land on an 1,800 foot strip or 1,900 foot strip. So you need to have your speed just right. So, all right. Thank you for joining me for another flight.